We're live and on the air. It's the bottom of the hour. Thank you for everybody for joining us. In light of if everyone on the call is in the USA, it's a fractious and fractured time. So we in this country. So we thought about a little bit about putting the unity in community as our theme today. So we're going to rip through some community resources that you may or may not know about, and talk about ways to engage more in the community and kind of what's in it for you. So we've put together about 3 slides to summarize different aspects of the community, but we definitely want to hear from you. Like this tends to be a small enough audience that we can very much target and focus our conversation about the things that matter to you. So the slides are intended to guide the conversation, but not to be the presentation. So please bear that in mind. Use the chat in the meeting, raise your hand. There's usually a pretty active side channel of conversation going on during the time. So for those who haven't met the team, there are 6 of us. We each bring a unique perspective to the things that we do, whether that's the technology, the community, the people side of things, et cetera. I think everybody has their own vantage point. That's why we mostly get along really well together and learn a lot from each other in the process.
That might
so today, So today, a little bit about community resources. And when we prepared for this, we thought, hey, there's a ton of stuff out there that's available to everybody. And what we're thinking of when we talk about community is not quite the same as all of that free stuff. So we'll talk a little bit about community resources that we know and love, and then we'll do a deep dive on a couple of these. So would anyone on the Synpraxis team, anyone want to rip through? We don't have to read bullet points to people. Generally, our client base can read. So
very literate our client base.
Yeah, thank God. Yeah. We're advanced.
So is there anything here we want to highlight?
I definitely could, say a quick word about the Patterns and Practice team, because so for those that are not aware, the Patterns and Practices team our Patterns and Practices group has been around for quite a while, and it was mostly focused around the SharePoint ecosystem, as that's sort of where it started, but it's been growing and growing and growing. And in the past 1.5 years, it's really expanded to meet the demands of the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. So it's really expanded out what it's covering. And so that group has probably quadrupled, and the amount of content coming out of that group as far as samples and examples and resources and libraries and community calls and demos it's overwhelming, the amount of content coming out of there. And so that is a great thing to get involved in, and we will have links in the resources, so I won't try to share them now, but the PNP
and
group,
a whole slide on PNP that we'll drill into with you for sure.
Yep.
Let me open it to the non-Synpraxians on the call. Out of these 7 or so topics, are there any that you're like, wow, didn't know that existed, need to dive deeper on that, or just tell me more about that? Does anybody want to pose a question there? Put me on the spot, I know it.
PNP, Greg says.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. So we're going to have a whole slide, so we'll definitely dive into that a little bit more.
All right. So I mean, I think we're all.
I couldn't get off mute. I wanted to love to know more about the people we trust and blogs we love.
Cool.
Sure. Cool.
Yep.
Yeah. I think we have slides on each of those too. The last one, maybe a little less so, but we talk about some of the online communities that we're involved in, and obviously how to engage them. There is a calls to action slide where we'll talk about that a bit. Is there any particular subject matter area around people we trust and blogs we love that you want to talk about?
Oh, well, Krista on the chat said she's interested in starting a SharePoint Saturday in her area. So we definitely can talk about that, as we do run one in a Teams Thursday, and a user group is sort of maintained by our little collective here. So
yeah, Krista, where are you from? What is your area?
Canada. Wow. Laurent. Yeah. Laurent's like, yes.
You stumbled across a group of Americans that actually understand Canadian geography a little bit. So, not just one way or the other. I've spoken to a Canadian today, so I'm
Fabulous. Well, I'm actually in Nova Scotia on the eastern shore of Canada.
The Canadian
cool.
I spoke to was also in Nova Scotia, so that's yeah.
Road.
I'm in the Halifax area, which is the capital of Nova Scotia. And to my knowledge, we don't have any kind of SharePoint Saturday event here, but it's definitely something that I'd love to get a local community. And there are a lot of organizations in our province using SharePoint now, and it'd be really great to get a community resource in place for this. So I'm very interested to hear how you guys kind of set yours up and what some options are for us.
Sure.
That's awesome. So glad you came.
Yeah.
That's why
Yeah.
people should be here. That's terrific.
Yep.
Great, thank you.
All right, let's drill into that. Let's start with the P&P piece. And Julie, I know this is near and dear to your heart. You spend a lot of your time and treasure here.
I do a lot.
I mean, several of us do, but this is really your wheelhouse. So why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, yeah. So I joined the P&P core team, which all that really means is that the P&P team has a set of, we'll call them guiders or guidance people that just try to help usher content out into the community. And so we manage repositories of content. The P&P all up has around 58 repositories currently that cover just such an enormous span of things. Various solutions, various example repositories for using things like the SharePoint framework. So a lot of them are dev-based, and that's historically been the case, that we've covered, the developer gamut of things you need, like SDKs and PowerShell modules and solution repositories that give you sort of a complete solution that you can then customize for yourself. So all sorts of things like that. But the P&P team itself, like I said a little bit earlier, has been expanding significantly. And Mark could speak to the fact he has also joined that P&P core team and ushering community docs, which we talked about a few weeks back. So those that were on that call probably know a little bit more about that. And we've really started doing other things too. So there's lots of samples. We started a Sharing is Caring initiative that helps people who are very new to contributing get up to speed on how to contribute to a GitHub repo, how to engage with the community. And even if you're not a dev, I mean, Todd, you were sort of speaking to this before about ways that you can contribute, and you don't have to be a developer to do it, right?
Yeah, I wanted to take a couple minutes to talk about that because like Julie said, the P&P initially was developer patterns and practices that Microsoft was sharing with third-party developers, so they wrote their stuff right, wrote web parts right, event receivers, that kind of thing. And I was around for that, so in my head, that's what the P&P was, but it's grown into so much more. And as somebody who's not a developer, I kept hearing people like Julie and Mark bang the drum. Well, you need to contribute, And I kept thinking, but I'm not a developer. Like I can't. So there's nothing for me here. And I would say that I said that for years. But then in the last year or so, it occurred to me that there is a bunch of stuff, especially like the P&P PowerShell, which is all developer stuff. So Mark's got the community docs that he's going to talk about. Obviously, you can be whatever for that. But for the PowerShell one, that was the one that I'm the most active in. I can't write PowerShell modules, but as an admin, I did have a lot to contribute, and it took a couple of years of these guys badgering me for me to realize this. So I've jumped in. I've helped with examples, writing examples, both fixing examples of the command not working the way the example says that it does, or the fact that I use them all the time. I've added more examples because I've tried to do a thing, couldn't find an example for it, finally figured it out. Helped out the next person. Submitting bugs and ideas. I submitted an issue a couple days ago. There's a couple of examples for Connect P&P Online, and I just don't get what the difference is between them. And so there's been some times in the past that I've put comments like that out and things have gotten cleaned up. So the thing that I wanted to get across for this one is you don't have to be a developer to have a big impact on the P&P.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point. And you can, even if you are a developer and utilizing one of the sort of SDKs like PNP.js or one of the other, core SDK repositories, CSOM SDKs, even if you don't feel like you're advanced enough to really contribute to those developing actual expansions to those libraries, like Todd is saying, building samples or updating documentation or any of the, just letting people know that hey, this is not working the way I think it's supposed to work. I've tried all of these things, submitting really good issues to the issues list can make it so much easier and so much faster for those who do try to write those solutions to be able to solve those issues faster for people. Because obviously all of the time put in by any person on the PNP is is done for free. We it's a time that we just do in our spare time. And so we don't always have a lot of time to contribute towards, trying to solve what the issue is. So by submitting really good issues, that can go a long way to really contributing to the community. And Mark, did you want to say something else about community docs?
Yeah, sure. I think we all, especially at Praxis, we all wear different hats, right? Sometimes I'm a developer, sometimes I'm a project manager, sometimes I'm a blogger. We all sort of do different things. So I think you can find places in all of these processes, regardless of which hat you happen to be wearing at the time. So for instance, you could go to the SP Dev Docs and ask a question like, I'm working with my developers on something and they've said this is really hard. Does anybody have an idea? It's not a technical question. It's, I want to understand better how to talk to my developers. There would be a discussion that would go on in that repo, and you would sort of say it's a discussion as opposed to a bug, because it's not a bug.
Right, exactly.
So if you think about the different roles or hats that we all wear, you can contribute in different ways. The community docs, Microsoft 365 community docs, Mike never writes it all out. I'm gonna hit him. So
you should.
Microsoft 365 community docs, and that's something unique, and we did talk about it a few weeks ago, so I won't go on too much about it. But it's community-driven content for people who are in the broad bucket of makers, people who use the platform to make stuff happen, and so the articles are often things that cross different services or outline, here's how I think about creating solutions like X. And if you have any thoughts about articles you'd like to see there, if you have suggestions about articles that are already there, if you have questions that you think an article could cover, anything like that, that's another way to sort of dip your toe into the community interaction. And I think you'll find that, I manage that one, so I know that it's a very friendly community. Usually you're going to be talking to me anyway. So think about
how friendly can it be, really?
Friendly community.
He's already threatened violence, and
So lots of good options in the PNP world. The sharing is caring thing is worth mentioning more than one time, because it's a way to learn about how we use some of these platforms to manage code, but also in the case of the community docs, the content that is a bunch of words on a screen. So it's not code, it's content. We can use platforms like GitHub and some of the other stuff that the PNP group offers to manage things that are not all about code.
So, Mark, as a non-developer, I attended the Sharing is Caring training, and I haven't contributed anything to those repos yet. But I'm able to have better conversations with our developers because I understand a little bit more about how GitHub works and how Markdown works. Like, it's free training in something that you will always find useful for people who are using GitHub.
It's learning different perspectives. I mean, it's never bad to sort of push against the envelope a little bit, go out of your comfort zone a little bit, learn some things that maybe you won't learn every day, but give you some of the lingo, some of the perspective, like you just said you got. That's great.
I wanted to jump in for the community docs. That one is a great equalizer, because I can't use the whole "I'm not a developer" excuse to get into that one. And Mark called me on that a couple of times, and I've written some stuff for it because of that. But then the next hurdle is, well, I don't know enough. Like, I'm not an expert. I don't have anything to contribute. And I got a couple of things to say about that. One of them is that's just not true. To be an expert, you just need to know the one thing that somebody needs to know. You don't have to know everything about it, but one experience you've had, one thing that you've done, you write that up or you add that to a document that's already there. To look like $1 million, just one person has to need that thing that you contributed. The other thing that a lot of us suffer from is imposter syndrome. This idea that we just, that we're really not experts in anything. And I can tell you all, a couple of days ago when we were talking about the slide deck and talking about this aspect, Julie's like, yeah, I can't contribute to some of this stuff. I don't know enough about it. We're like, get the hell out of here. What do you mean you don't know enough about it? So even she was talking herself out of contributing some stuff because she didn't feel comfortable that she had, which is completely ridiculous, of course. So just know that when you feel that and you're doubting yourself, every single one of us is doing that all day long. So just go ahead and write something.
We all have imposter syndrome, for sure. Yeah. For sure. I think the last thing I want to sum up, and I know we have more to cover, so I just want to summarize. The other thing you can do is get involved in those community calls. Just show up for the community calls and listen to what's being talked about, and you may get some great ideas just by joining those community calls. And then the last thing is amplifying the PNP message is another way to contribute, right? Sharing out the new demos, sharing out new content that has happened that you found useful. Back to Todd's point, by sharing it, you might help somebody else who's like, oh, wow, I didn't know that existed. And now that you've contributed that to the, social media crowd, so to speak, somebody else might know about it. And that's great, right?
Julie, it's a great point, to the point of like blogs we like, we love, people we trust. If you show up at those community calls and you just watch the conversation and see what people talk about and who defers to whom, it's easy to find experts in those calls too. It's a useful side benefit of that. And I love the fact that you don't need to have the answer, right? You can tell a person is clever by their answers, but you can tell a person is wise by their questions. So bring your questions to community docs, and there's a lot of good answers out there. All right, so a little bit different from PNP, and let's talk about how it's different. Is there's a rich community that's very Microsoft centric, right? That is managed by them, that is owned by them, as opposed to PNP, which is kind of facilitated by them. There are developer evangelists within Microsoft whose job it is to help PNP and coordinate it and everything else. The Microsoft Tech Community stuff on this slide is much more curated by Microsoft. So who wants to talk about a little bit about how we use this and how it might be useful to folks on this call?
So I think similar to the topic around PNP, we were talking about issues and asking questions. The forums in the Microsoft Tech community can be incredibly helpful for you to go in and ask about specific software. There's a lot of community members in there scanning, as well as Microsoft employees that answer the questions there. So if you're running into an issue and you just want to throw that question out into the world because you don't know who that right person is, I highly recommend posting those in the tech community hubs. There are different community hubs specific to the different solutions. So just make sure you post in the right one, and then you should be getting some community help there.
Emily, you want to speak to user voice? Because I know you had a hot issue this week or last, or you kind of had a beef that you had to get out there.
Hot under the collar, maybe.
Yeah, it's a little too soon, but let's do it.
All right.
So I think there's a couple different ways that I see user voice. So essentially, user voice is this spot for us to say any recommendations or features we'd like to see in Microsoft 365. As those get upvoted, so anyone can go on there, read these issues, and vote for them, that's something that Microsoft pays a lot of attention to. So if there's an item that's getting a lot of upvotes, we can all be really hopeful. Maybe that's going to be at the next, Ignite announcement or some kind of feature addition. So it's a great place to get their attention. What Mike is referring to is I ran into a feature issue on Microsoft Forms last week where I deleted a question, and previously when you deleted questions, the responses weren't deleted. They were still there in Excel. Unfortunately, Microsoft changed the back end of Forms and there was no warning. So I deleted the question and I had a really big data loss. And when I called Microsoft support, it's on their servers. There's no way to restore it. So I put in a user voice item to add a warning in Microsoft Forms so people understand that they're going to lose that data when they make that delete. So as you're working in Microsoft, if you have a pain point or a negative experience and you see that there's the opportunity to improve that, post that in user voice and socialize it and get people to vote on it. Because anytime you run into an issue, other people probably are too. And this is a way for us all to work together and help make Microsoft 365 even better.
In a very democracy, small d, right, kind of way, right?
Yeah, and there are a million stories of the product groups at Microsoft making plans based on user voice, like absolutely picking fruit that's hanging from user voice and saying we can make, a bunch of people happy if we fix this. So that's not a black hole. They absolutely follow that.
Yeah, and if you go to the PMP community calls, sorry, Mark, if you go to the PMP community calls, Vesa on the monthly call puts the top 10 user voices, how many votes they have and which ones they're working on and which ones they'll address. So from a developer perspective, but still.
One of the powers of this community is we can gang up on those user voice items, right? We can blast out, through Twitter or social, other social media things, and talk to our friends and stuff, and get people to vote for stuff. So, if you are, and we'll talk about some of the social media aspects, I think, separately, but if you see somebody like Emily has posted a user voice item and it makes sense to you, then you go vote it up. And so we can actually create groundswells of requests that Microsoft listens to. And I've heard different stories about which ones they listen to, but it's anything that gets depends on which user voice you actually land on, but like 10 votes or 100 votes or something. It doesn't have to be huge numbers to get on their radar. And if the community at large is saying, hey, this is really important, they're going to pay attention.
On the tech community, the Intrazone podcast that Mark Cashman and Chris McNulty do is a really great way to stay informed, especially if you have a commute. Remember commutes and driving to an office actually to work?
No.
That's right. That's right. No one at Praxis was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Really, really useful. It's helped me kill some long drives for sure. And I've learned from it, and the developer blogs, well documented here, but I'd like to kind of spend a little bit more time on the how to get involved, especially in light of the question about creating a user group. So how do people get involved with the community?
Yeah, so I guess we should, I definitely want to answer the question on the user group, the SharePoint Saturday. I will say that I got asked to do a SharePoint Saturday or work with someone to do a SharePoint Saturday long before Mark and I worked together to do a SharePoint Saturday. And I thought it was going to be so overwhelming and unattainable. I think the key is finding a location that doesn't cost any money. And that sounds, it may be, unattainable, but we do have the Microsoft MTC Center, and you can then ask to use their space for a Microsoft related event, and they will let you use their space for free. And in our case, they have catering built into the building because it's a Microsoft building and they have a caterer on site. So that caterer can do our food for lunch and such things like that. Getting sponsors is more, that's probably the most uncomfortable aspect of it, going out and asking people for money. But you do need to get a few sponsors together. But if your location is free, the amount of money you really need to get is only reverse to how much you need for things like food or things like that. And you can really cut your budget down to next to nothing if you do some pizza or whatever and call it a winner. But usually, the community is great. And so a request for speakers, you just put that out there and see who wants to come and talk. And what's great about the SharePoint Saturday aspect of things or Microsoft 365 Saturday is that often, you can get some new speakers, and it's a great, sort of safe place for new speakers to sort of, spread their wings. So that imposter syndrome thing, if you want to, you can make like a lightning round time where, maybe it's just a 20-minute quick idea talk. And that really allows those new speakers to, do a small bite topic really quickly so that they're not overwhelmed by trying to build an hour and 10-minute session around something. So there's lots of ways to sort of do it slow, edge into it, and then it will build over time, for sure.
I think Julie and I started working on the SharePoint Saturday New England together. I don't know 4 years ago we started.
4, yeah.
I think the key is to start simple. Maybe you start a user group, and it's a little bit of that. Wherever 2 or more of you are gathered in my name, you get a few people together and just. And together is hard these days, right? But you could just have a Zoom call that happens once every 2 or 3 weeks. and people could just join to discuss things in your area. And then that could grow into a larger group of people, and then that might turn into, hey, let's put on a show. Let's do a SharePoint Saturday. So I think you can start small, keep it simple, and then see where it goes. You'll find that people sort of come out of the woodwork to help you. We get volunteers from people who we would never have expected. A guy offered to take the extra food from our SharePoint Saturday and give it to a I think it's a homeless shelter. Just this like really nice stuff happens around that kind of an event, and you'll find that there's a lot of reward in it. That's a lot of sort of intangible stuff. I mean, people really appreciate the work that you go through, but it doesn't have to be hard. You don't have to do. I mean, you see some of these SharePoint Saturdays where they've got bands and they've got 3 days worth of speakers and stuff. That's down the road. After you sort of figure that you've really got something rolling. Start simple. It won't be that hard to get going.
Yeah, I think the starting simple is really good. I've been working with the New Hampshire user group now for about a year and a half, and especially since COVID, we've gone completely virtual. And that's actually opened us up to a whole slot of new speakers from outside of our local area. I know the folks in and around Boston and New Hampshire get kind of tired because we keep asking them, but we have Shane Young coming in on Thursday to talk, and he's out in, I don't know, where is he, Todd? Iowa?
Cincinnati. He wishes he was in Iowa. We won't take him.
Iowa, Ohio.
He's not welcome.
Yeah, we took Shane
same.
Over Todd's objections, right?
Exactly.
I'm thinking about quitting. I'm offended by this.
But the barrier to entry today, because of COVID, is a lot lower than sort of getting it all together, to have an in-person event.
But Derek, conversely, the challenge is to rise above the noise, because I think there's a lot of events that are, the drumbeat of events is pretty heavy.
There is, but especially if you're in an area that doesn't have a whole lot of information out there, or in-person gatherings, start small and say, this is just for our people, and try to socialize it among your friends and the folks in your area that are.
Well, I think the key is too, it is Mark and I always saw SharePoint Saturday and Teams Thursday New England as local networking events. It's a way for the people in this regional area to stay connected about, people that are looking for work, or, just being, these are people that live in your area, and you want to, develop that community. It's great to have a worldwide community as well, but that regional community can really be a support center.
Really important.
And so, so for us, we have not done either of those events because we believe strongly that in-person aspect is really, really important, and are happy to see that a lot of people in the rest of the world are doing a lot of virtual conferences, and so they're fulfilling that need. So we're not going to join in on that bandwagon, but as soon as it comes back to a point where we can be in person, those events are definitely coming back, because I think that's so important to support that local regional community.
And Krista, don't feel like you have to do this on your own. We have all kinds of checklists and stuff we use when we're putting together one of these things. We'd be happy to share.
Yep.
Hey, Mark, are those checklists in community docs? I was just thinking about that.
Huh. That would be a great article.
That really is.
Why don't you get on top of that, Mike? It could be your first contribution.
Because I don't run a user group or a SharePoint Saturday?
You have resources
so does
that we can help you.
There are some smart people on this call.
You're saying you don't have anything to offer. You don't have.
I'm an imposter, total imposter. I'm a
fraud. I can confirm that is the case. Yes. Mike, yes.
Let me just tee that up for you, Todd.
Yes, that is slow. Just kind of called it.
Yeah.
All right. So
I was going to do golf swing, but yes.
Nice. So there's a lot that we've covered across these areas. We've embedded the resources in each of these. We post the slides up, right? So people can get access to these links.
All the links. Yep.
We post the links, not the slides, but yeah.
Yep. And the last is there's, to use a good example of an upcoming virtual event. One of the next steps is 3 of us are presenting. Well, we didn't on here.
Sorry, that was my mistake. It is Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th of November. Several of
Don't
our
worry, it'll be great.
sessions, there's a lot of good sessions. May be good, Krista, as a blueprint. Like, let's see how they organized this and compare notes with Mark or Julie after organizing and running an event like this. So please feel free to join if you're available on Friday the 13th. Regarding PNP, one of the things we've had so much success with and like so much is using the PNP search web parts. So our next Ask in Praxis in 2 weeks will be focused on using the PNP modern search web parts and kind of maybe some comparisons between Microsoft first party stuff that they have in the product versus what the community does, because you don't want to invest in something a problem that Microsoft's going to solve in 3 months. So I think there's some pretty thoughtful ways of looking at this that we'll talk about in 2 weeks. Anything else we should cover? I know we're at time, but did we answer the questions people came here to get answers to?
I think so, but the chat stays open for a little while after too. So if you end up putting a message in the chat after, one of us definitely will answer. So
in that case, look for us in 2 weeks. Thank you for joining Ask in Praxis today, and thanks everybody for your contributions.
See you,
Have
everybody.
a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.